Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. Please have a seat. Grab your coffee. Ooh, they have K-cup coffee. Fancy. Welcome, everybody. This is the Joint Agency Solar Consumer Protection meeting, the stakeholder session. Thank you for being here. My name is Sarah Sharp. I think most of you might now know me. This is our quarterly meeting that we have been holding for the last year or more, maybe. And so we have a lot on the agenda, and it's only 2 hours, so I'm going to try and be really good with keeping us on time and making sure that we have time at the end for comments and discussion from all the participants. We have quite a few people joining us by phone and on the webinar. So I think we can hear you now. We will do introductions so we know who we have. We'll have to do it really quickly because we have a lot of people here. And then we will probably put those folks on mute on the line, but we would ask that you also mute yourself if you are able to. And also for those who are here, if you don't know, the restroom is out the hall behind the stairs. And I will pass it off to our, and unfortunately, Commissioner Alvarez for the Department of Business Oversight was not able to join us for this morning session, but we will be meeting with him later today and we'll brief him on what we've discussed. So I will let our commissioners and registrar give us a welcome, and we'll have Colleen also welcome.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Commissioner Guzman Aceves. Please call me Martha. And just happy to be here today and the continued work, sharing progress and next steps. And I will keep it short so we can keep on track. And thank you to the CSLB for hosting us yet again. Thank you.
So good morning. I'm Dave Fote, the Registrar for the Contractors Board. I too would like to thank you for attending this morning, and really looking forward to your feedback and you sharing your ideas and how we can move forward to protect consumers in the solar industry. So thank you.
Colleen Monahan, Senior Counsel with Department of Business Oversight. Unfortunately, Commissioner Alvarez wasn't able to be here this morning, but we thank you all for having us here today. As everyone knows, Department of Business Oversight licenses and regulates since last year PACE program administrators. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask everybody in the room to introduce themselves. I won't ask the ones up here yet because you guys will be probably speaking at some point. So we'll do that the room, and then we'll do the phone so we can just know who's participating. So do we want to start with Ed in the front, and then we'll go back that way?
Protecting our citizens in Parlier and the Fresno County.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Marna. I'm with the Consumer Protection Enforcement Division of the CPUC, Utility Enforcement Branch.
I'm Austin Baird with Veteran Solar.
Shelley with the Contractor State License for Safety Mediation.
Justin Wickersham, I'm the Enforcement Representative 2 with the Contractor State License.
Nora Salazar Hernandez with Central California Legal Services.
Good morning, Alfred Gallegos. I'm an attorney with Central California Legal Services.
Lynette Young, California Public Utilities Commission, Consumer Affairs Branch.
Cynthia Moore, Contractor State License Board.
Mike Jemneski, CSLB Legislation.
Heather Young, Executive CSLB.
Becky Light, Enforcement, CSLB.
Rick Lopes from Public Affairs at CSLB.
Special Strong, Fire Energy Fund.
Peterson with Port 5, formerly C3. Rick Hamline, CSLB Quality Assurance.
Pete Campbell, Great Alternatives.
Florencio Francisco, CSLB Enforcement.
Chad Gay, CSLB Enforcement.
Tracy King,
Jack Ramsey, Altsys Solar.
Bill Blodgett, Vivid Solar.
Stephanie Construction, Vision Solar.
And Steve Burke, Vivid Solar as well.
Okay, is there anybody in the room who hasn't introduced? Yeah, Mel? Anybody else who joined us in a late? Okay. And then on the phone, Rick, are they connected?
Yeah, we've got about 5 or 30 people on the phone.
Okay, can you just name your name and your organization, please, on the phone, and then we'll get started. Maybe we should start alphabetically, so if your last name is like start with the A's. Yeah, well, if you have an early letter, if you don't have an A or B last name, maybe C. Can we hear them? Or anybody speak from the phone? Okay, anybody on the phone? Yes, now I can hear you.
Can you hear us? Okay. Hi, this is Lauren Dossie, Deputy DA, Riverside County.
Thank you. Well, there's 24 other folks on there. Are they able to speak? Yeah.
It's a big jump from D to T, but Paul Thomas, SCJ.
Oh, I couldn't hear your name, actually.
Paul Thomas, meeting.
Hi, this is Andrea Lucetta, representing Click.
Andrea Lucetta from Click. I heard that one. I couldn't hear the other one. I think it was PG&E. I think it may be if they are listening on their computer and then they're on their phone, we're hearing like echo. Might be the problem. Okay, so we'll move on. If anybody else want to introduce themselves from the phone? Those were actually all. Oh, go ahead.
Renee Valencia with Southern California Edison.
Great. So those are all the people I knew to expect on the phone. I don't know who else is on there.
Justin Rylett and Mike Anderson from Renovate America.
Echo. Okay. We're gonna mute. Let's mute the lines. Sorry.
It's a good try.
Yeah, we tried. So just a reminder of the goals and objectives for meetings, as the commissioner and registrar mentioned. This is a good opportunity for us to check in, update each other, and make sure we're coordinating on all of our different efforts. This has been an ongoing effort, as I mentioned, and we have, the 3 agencies, but also a lot of you stakeholders that have been very engaged with us. We have working groups. There's 3 working groups. Just to remind everybody, there's a preventative education and outreach working group. There's an enforcement working group, and there is a complaint tracking and monitoring, I think is the name of it. We're looking for Cynthia or something. Anyway, hey, Justin. So those are our working groups. A lot of what will be reported are what each agency is doing individually and separately within our jurisdiction, and then we will also report a little on what we're doing jointly, and then we will have time for those of you in the audience who have things to update us on and report back on, and then we'll discuss next steps and what we need to do moving forward. So, CSLB, who do we have presenting for you?
Well, it's
Dave?
going to be a joint effort, but what we'd like to do this morning is provide you an overview of the information that's publicly available so that we can identify contractors that have registered salespersons and are ideally doing the work appropriately, and then also to identify those that are engaged in some type of predatory behavior that we should be wary of. And we also would like to provide you some information on changes that we've made and how we're handling the investigations, and perhaps most importantly, obtain your feedback on how we can improve even more. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Becky Like. She's going to provide a demonstration, it's pretty brief, on the information that's available on our website. You'll see from the slide as it relates to license status, who the personnel of record are, the salespeople that are registered, and the complaint disclosure information that's available. So Becky.
I believe we're pulling up the presentation now so that folks can see it by webinar. If you're only on the phone, you would need to connect on your computer to see the slides.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so this is the CSLB website. And from this website, we have a plethora of information that can be accessed. Today, we're going to, like Dave said, we're going to just do a couple of license checks to demonstrate what can be found when there's a contractor who's violating the law and a contractor who abides by the rules. So to start, what you do is you go back you click on license check. And it's always important because to get the license number, because a lot of companies will have multiple licenses or operate under different business names. So we like to check by license number. We're going to start with this is one that might be familiar to a lot of you, Myers Life Solutions. As you can see, the license status is it's a revoked license. They are not able to contract at this time. Additional status allows us to look at complaint disclosure information. So here you would find, in this case, an accusation. And you are able to click on the accusation. And what you see now are the different violations that are being charged under this accusation. You can furthermore just look at the actual accusation in total. This is a 30-page accusation. This can be printed out. You can read through it online. And then also the order, which is important because it documents that they are not allowed to do business any longer in the state of California. And then it documents the ordered date and the effective date. This also allows you to see what classifications this contractor had. This was a B building contractor, so allowed to do solar in the state of California. They had a bond, they had workers' compensation. Notice they don't have any salespeople. If there were salespeople, there would be a salesperson list here. We know that they had salespeople, but clearly they did not have any registered with us at the Contractors Board. Okay, so I'm going to go and do another check on another license. And this is Aztec Solar. Thank you, Ed, for letting us use you as an example of what good looks like. So Aztec Solar is current and active. They have a B General and a C46, workers' compensation, a personnel list, and also a salesperson list. So these are the salespeople that are registered to Aztec Solar. And that really that's the summary of what I was going to do. If anybody has any questions or would like to take a look at another license real quick, we're happy to do that. But that just goes, what we want to show is our extensive disclosure and what's available to the public when choosing a contractor or just wanting to know more about what's happening with a given business or contractor. I'm sorry? It's not in, is it in Spanish?
The only thing we have at this time is we do have the Google Translate feature, so you can set that on, click on it, and then it will do that in Spanish.
Okay, so I have a question.
Sure.
On the second one, for example, not that there is, but sometimes what I've seen is I'll check the salesman's name on there, and even though it's the name of that company, he's not on there. So then that alludes to maybe that person worked under no license, didn't have a license but was employed by the company.
Okay.
So not always are they gonna show up.
Right. Right. So what you're saying is an HIS is registered but not connected to a specific company? Is that what I heard you say?
Not registered, but
Not
it's
registered.
connected to the company.
Okay. So then they would be an unregistered salesperson. Yes. Yeah.
But to clarify, that's not allowed, right?
No, correct.
So you can
Yeah, no, not
complain,
allowed,
yeah. Yes, just wanted to make sure we're
Yeah.
saying.
I mean,
that.
example, Myers Life, they probably should have had several people listed as salespeople, but they did not operate, above the law. Okay.
Becky, can you describe the difference? You had a tab that said license and then another tab that said HIS license. Could you describe the difference?
Sure.
Thank you.
So license number, business name, and personnel name, these would relate to a contractor. The HIS number and the HIS name, these are the home improvement salespeople. So you could look up specifically a number of a home improvement salesperson to make sure maybe it matched to a name or vice versa. You're welcome.
Yeah, and when you looked up the license, you could also look up the personnel that are listed on license because they can also be out selling. So it's important to recognize that.
Yes, exactly.
But anybody that's selling that home improvement contract, soliciting, negotiating, or executing a contract needs to be personal record or listed as a salesperson on that record, on that license history.
Any further questions? Okay, I'm going to get the PowerPoint set back up and turn it over to Chief of Enforcement, Missy Vickery.
While you're doing that, I got something in the mail today. I got an invitation to a steak dinner to learn about smart energy. So, and they have a license number on their thing, which I know is required, so I want to look this one up when we have time. I kind of really want a steak too. But I won't go.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they have the instructions. The instructions right
So-
there. Go ahead.
Do you need a license to send mailers? Even if you have to fulfill the contract?
You wouldn't need a license to send a mailer, just to mail it out. But if you're going to be the person that's going to be responding to a call from that mailer, to go to somebody's house, as an example, to try to solicit work or to negotiate a contract, you would need to be a registered salesperson. So with that, Missy, go ahead and explain, give me an update on what's happening in the solar industry.
You got the slides up?
No, but we can go without them.
Okay, so a recap of what CSLB Solar Task Force has done. In 2019, we received 859 solar-related cases. Of those, in less egregious matters, we were able to get 1.7 million in restitution for consumers. When there's a serious violation warranting more stringent action, in 2019, we took 73 legal actions. Of those, 16 were referred for criminal action to the DA, 19 accusations, 34 citations, and 4 non-licensee citations. Dave, I'll turn it back over to you.
Next slide talks about the registration process, and we just really want to kind of circle back on home improvement salesperson registration because we believe it is posing a threat to consumer protection. The law was changed a few years ago that allows salespeople to register individually. So you can be registered yourself, and you could be tied or represent numerous contractors, and that's why that came up in the overview of that license, and that, or Ed's license, I should say, that he has salespeople. He may not be motivated to allow his salespeople to sell for others, but yet that does happen. Now, the licensee, such as Ed, needs to notify the CSLB if he's going to employ a salesperson, so that information is available. We looked at, I believe last week, we took a look at the complaints that are assigned to the Solar Task Force, and it was kind of interesting if you take a look at these numbers. 213 open complaints, 38% of them had an unregistered salesperson. Now, the reason why we did this is because we need to be identifying who these unlicensed people are. We need to have a tracking mechanism so that they're known. They're committing a misdemeanor by being an unregistered salesperson. Now, you'll see down the next bullet is 94 had a registered HIS, but 27 of them, or 29% of the 94, resulted in a complaint being filed alleging misrepresentation. So we really have here is we have a situation where salespeople are registered and unregistered, and yet they're negotiating contracts where the consumer believes the work or the contracted terms were misrepresented. So it's a problem. And we're seeing that in the solar industry. We haven't really seen it in other industries. So we ask ourselves, how are we going to be more effective in identifying these salespeople that are engaged in this activity? And the way we're doing that now is when a consumer complaint is received, historically what the Contractors Board does is they open a complaint up against the contractor, licensed or not, and you investigate the contractor and you hold the contractor accountable for the salespeople. But there is a way you can do that differently, and that is you can't investigate the home improvement salesperson for failing to comply with the law. So what we're doing now is when a consumer files a complaint, we're opening a spinoff registrar complaint to investigate the home improvement salesperson. It's going to do two things. One, it's going to assist us with our tracking of these salespeople, but also to identify if we have salespeople that are registered that should have that registration taken away. The public should have disclosure for that salesperson if they've engaged in an illegal act. So we're excited about it. I think it's going to be very helpful for our next meeting to be able to show those individuals that have taken, the action that's been taken, that shouldn't be out negotiating for a home improvement contract anywhere in the state. These are the sections of law that we're focusing on. The first is failing to register as a HIS. They could be registered themselves, but they have to be registered to the licensee. That relates to the salesperson. The 7154 relates to the licensed contractor that would be employing somebody that's unregistered. What are the two sections of law that we're most concerned about? One is Business Professions Code 7159. That's a home improvement contract law. Contracts have to be written in a certain way. There has to be solar disclosure. The payments cannot exceed the value of the work. A down payment is restricted to no more than $1,000. 7161 it relates to misrepresentation in a home improvement contract. And so those are the two we're going to be looking at. If we have a salesperson that's engaged in behavior that resulted in a violation of those two sections of law, that registration should be revoked. These are just two sections of law that I wanted to make you all aware of. You're probably familiar with them. The first is 7031. Contractor is not duly licensed at all time from the point that contract is signed to the time when the work is done. That contractor is not entitled to any payment. If they've been paid, they're subject to disgorgement. 7153 talks about a security interest not being enforceable if the salesperson was unregistered. It could help consumers if they were aware of these two sections of law. May not necessarily help, though, when there's a lien on the house, and that loan has to be repaid. But it does impact the contractor for sure. So that's kind of what we're looking at with the salesperson. We took it a step further, and we're saying, okay, what's happening with some of these complaints? I've reviewed a number of them myself, and it's kind of distressing when a consumer says, I'm now stuck with a loan on my house or a lien on my house. I've got to pay back this loan. And I didn't even agree to this contract. So we asked our task force to review all of their open complaints. And they reviewed at that time, it was 151. And you'll see that 87 of them were signed digitally. 21 of the complainants deny having signed or approved the contract. So those are distressing numbers. Now, what happens if somebody says, I didn't sign or agree to that contract? Well, the contractor's got a problem. This is something we implement in the service and repair industry. If you can't prove to us that that consumer had a signed copy of the contract prior to commencing work, you are in violation of the law. And we're going to take action against your contractor's license for that. You're taking a big risk if you're doing it all electronically and you cannot prove that they, one, approved it, they signed it. It can be signed electronically, but they better be in agreement that they did. You better have some way of verifying it, and that they had a copy of the contract before you started the work. Because if we're seeing, what we've done in the service and repair industry is if we see a pattern, we see more than 2 consumers that are complaining about that same issue, we are going to take action, and we have taken action against the license. Something else that's kind of unique to the solar industry, and that's where the contractor is paid directly. A lot of times, you might want to do a remodel on your house, go to the bank, you get a home improvement loan, you control the money, you pay the contractor. We wanted to take a look at our open complaints to see how often the contractor was paid directly by the lender. It wasn't as high as we thought, 14% of the time the contractor was paid directly, and we had 8 allegations where a false certificate was obtained so that the payment could be made in advance of work. In the state of California, if you're requesting or receiving payment in advance of the work being done for home improvement, that's a criminal offense. You can't do that. And that's one thing our task force is really focused on. Somebody, especially they filed a false completion certificate alleging that the work is done and they got paid in full and that work isn't done, at a minimum, that's a misdemeanor. It can also be charged as a felony, and we'll get to that in a moment. I do have some good news. We took a look at our pending complaints, and we took a look at contract dates that were after January 1st, 2019. The reason we use that date is because of AB 1284 that provided authority for our friends at DBO to have oversight, and also it required additional consumer protection things be implemented so that consumers are protected. And what we found here is that out of 180 cases, complaints that we have with a contract date after January 1st of 2019, only 10 of the complaints were PACE funded. Now, granted, we may not have received those yet, but that's a substantial reduction. And only one of those complaints was alleged misrepresentation, and that was George Safonov. So, boy, that's a big difference from what we had in 2018. So let's hope that's a positive trend. Yes, sir.
I'm a little curious. Will you use the mic for the questions, please, because people are on the phone?
So out of the 180 complaints, do we have any idea how many consumers actually signed up for a solar system in 2019? I'm just curious what percentage of consumers those complaints represent.
We don't know. I know that.
I believe we have the interconnection numbers, but
Okay.
I don't know if we have them with us today. Do you know? Yeah.
So as of October 2019, there were approximately 950,000 interconnections across all utility territory. However, to just address the question in your question, these 180 complaints are from people who know where to complain. And a majority of complainants may or may not know where to go to complain. And so the CPUC also gets complaints, and there's going to be a presentation about that later on.
Marna, is that number for just 2019, or is that total since NEM began? Okay, so yeah.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to ask that Jesse Flores, our Deputy Chief of Enforcement, provide an update on George Safonov. Jesse?
Good morning, everyone. I'm based in Southern California, and as you see, I got a name tag that was written, so I was last minute. No kidding. I'm working with a great group of investigators and prosecutors who are looking at the PACE-related scams that are going on. And as you can see from Mr. Safonov, who's been notorious for us for some time, this took a long time to get to this point. He was arrested in San Diego, and he's got 22 charges against him. We expect to, moving forward, we hope we get some reasonable prosecution on this case. So, I don't really want to say anything more, but if you have any questions after, feel free to ask me.
Well, the only thing I would mention, if we put that back up, this is an example of what we can do with a contractor that's engaged in predatory behavior. Just kind of look at what the counts that were charged are. First is receiving payment for work in excess of the value of the work. Identity theft, using somebody else's license number. We've certainly seen that in the solar industry. We have theft by false pretenses. That's misrepresenting the work, telling somebody they're going to do something or it's a great deal, you're getting paid for it, and it's not true. We have diversion of construction funds. Where did the money go? Was it used for the project? I was talking to Lulu earlier today, and she mentioned a situation where a contractor was paid, and we've seen this in a couple of cases, was paid for the job and then came back and took the panels off and used them somewhere else. So somebody's making a payment now and they don't have any solar panels. What happened to those construction funds? They got diverted. There's no benefit to that consumer. And then how many of our consumers are over 65 years of age? That's why we have the elder abuse. So San Diego, we've had a very strong relationship with them in putting these type of cases together. And that's an example of what we need to do in other counties when we have the same fact pattern.
It's great news, Dave. And thank you to so many people in the room. I know, the industry, the consumer advocates, everybody helped put together, bring this to our attention and bring the case. And, the district attorneys and everybody's been working on it. So, and CSLB especially, we really appreciate finally seeing some kind of progress on this front. As we know, especially bad actor. Do you have one more slide? I think you do.
Yeah, we have one more slide. This is just kind of what we were kicking around is, the Contractors Board has the ability to propose legislation. And so we wanted your feedback on whether we should be thinking about proposing legislation for these three different areas. The first is, should we preclude direct payment to the contractor for home improvement? Or if it's going to be permitted, does there need to be some kind of established protocol for what's going to be done before the payment is made? And I know that's something we've wrestled with here. When does final payment get made in the solar industry? I've heard that it's when the permit is signed off, yet it may not be hooked up to the grid or functional. That's something we're still wrestling with. Somebody's got a solar system, it doesn't work, it's paid in full, and it's been 6 months, and they're making the payments now, and it's not working. That's a problem. Should that be allowed? Should there be a 7-day right to rescind instead of 3 days when somebody shows up at your front door trying to sell you a solar system and what is really a complex financial agreement? Seems like there should be an additional cooling off period for that. And also, should we look at increasing the bond? The bond is $15,000. I know that we'll talk a little bit more later about perhaps establishing a recovery fund. But at a minimum, should there be a bond for the salesperson? Maybe that would be helpful. These salespeople that can just skip from one entity to the other, maybe they should have some bonding requirement that could help consumers that are financially injured. So these are just three things that we're thinking about that might help the solar industry, and we'd welcome your feedback on them. Yes.
Well, we will bring a microphone, and then we will open up the phone lines. And if you are on the phone, you probably need to mute your computer while you're trying to talk on the phone.
Thank you, David. Besides PACE, are there any other industries that are directly paying contractors?
It's something we have not seen. It's interesting where where the lender is paying the contractor directly. I don't know that it's just PACE, but I know solar has been where we've seen it, but we haven't seen it in other industries.
Thank you, and good job, everybody. This is definitely giving at least renewable energy a better face. And you guys are doing a great job. I love the website. But I wanted to refer on your slide 6, the one that's the home improvement salesperson. Also, how does an HIS person know that they have to register like this? How are we telling, future, salespeople? Because we have a lot of young people, maybe they don't know, migrants, language barriers, or cultural barriers. So it would be good to know that, so that way we could, pass that information over. And then on slide 10, the points there are great, as far as the complaints go. But I would add that, unfortunately, PACE lenders, the key point that they stick to us when we call.
I think we need to mute the line, yeah.
When you call to get clarification on, these PACE loans, the first thing they do is act very rude. I understand they're customer service people, but the first thing they'll treat the client for, then I have recordings of it, with Fortified, now it used to be E3, with, Renovate, with all of them, they treat our clients like criminals. And it's, until I bring it down, it's like, hey, there's someone else here listening. But they say that the call is the proof that they have for the digital signatures. So, we're in an age of technology, and if the PACE lenders are claiming that, they don't need to do a paper or a cool-off period for people to go back on these loans, they should also tell us, prove it to us, when that digital file was opened and what IPM opened it. Was it on a phone? Was it on a laptop? did it belong to that, even a family member that signed digitally? Because that's the key thing here, that we have to see what little things they're picking at to say that our clients are responsible for that loan. So then, okay, then we want to see that kind of proof that you requested from the salesperson and from the client. And another thing you could tell in audio, I worked in radio for 15 years. In audio, you could tell when the phone's on mute. And this happens on the calls a lot, because I've asked one of the persons play the audio so I could see if it's her voice. And you could tell that the client is not paying attention, because probably paying attention to the salesperson coaching them. Just say yes, just yes. They're just asking if I'm here and if I did this contract and if you see the panels on your roof, when they're not paying attention to what the questions are. I would like still to know what is asked when they do the phone verification for those digital loans.
Those are all great ideas. If I could just touch on the education of the unregistered salesperson. We do monthly workshops in the north and the south, and we can expand those to other areas of the state. But this would be a very good idea to invite these salespeople to come to our workshops, set them up specifically for home improvement salespersons so they understand the rules. We can also look at doing a webinar. And one way we can make this happen, though, is by the database that we're creating. It does have the unregistered and the registered, and there's an opportunity to train both of them on what the law requires. So thank you for that and sharing your ideas how we can verify that they in fact did approve that agreement.
CSLB should have a booth at all Home Expo shows.
We have a really big home expo in Fresno.
Rick?
On the electronic signature questions, some of them I know that are going to be now required with our new decision that I believe was passed last voting meeting. Was it? And so Chris was just reminding me that that will be in effect 120 days after that, which will be June 14th. So any contracts that are uploaded to the interconnection portal after that date will then have that audit trail included. So we will have more of a record of how that electronic signature was submitted and when the documents were viewed and that kind of thing, from my understanding.
Dave, this is Josh at CalSA. I was wondering if you have been able to get any contracts from the interconnection portal as part of your investigations or not, and if you're going to be doing that in the future.
Yeah, almost on a daily basis, I ask Becky if we've got a contract. Becky, do we have a contract?
Okay, so first, Chris, I want to thank you very much for helping to facilitate the interaction with the IOUs. And I went back into the portal and pulled up a handful of complaints that involved contractors that we had issues with historically. And I received all of the documents, but there were no contracts attached because it was October. And the IOUs stated in their description and in their explanation as to what was included that it wasn't required of them to attach the contracts yet until after, I'm guessing, October. So while I have all that information, I don't have the contract.
Wasn't it mostly September interconnections? Or maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, because I think that the requirement was after September 30th, so maybe they were September.
I mean, I will absolutely go back and look, but it was the data was pulled, most recently updated October 31st of 2019, which would be the most updated interconnection portal data. So when looking through the cover sheets, they had included the interconnection application, all of that information, but the stuff I was really looking for, being the home improvement salesperson, the contractor, and being able to look at the contract to compare it to our information, that wasn't attached.
So can the CSLB follow up with those contractors as to, because I mean, if the applications were submitted after September 30th, they should have uploaded contracts.
Right. We will investigate this. This is the first we've heard about that, and I had only known that they had requested them. I didn't know that we received it, and obviously, utility enforcement branch also will look at if people are not complying with our new regulations. And does anybody have any other information? It's PG&E. I don't know if they were PG&E or SCE. I don't know if we have SDG&E on the line. I think there are other folks on the line that we didn't hear, so maybe they have any.
It came from all three
Information.
IOUs, so.
Anybody from, Rick, do you want to unmute is it unmuted?
They can unmute themselves.
Okay, folks, anybody from any of the IOUs have comments on this? Not right now. Sounds like we need to look into it more.
Yeah, hi. Actually, this is Renee Valencia from Southern California Edison.
Yes, go ahead.
And as far as contracts go, again, you hit it on the head about the dates, right? But as we get closer to the semi-annual audit that we're supposed to perform, we'll have more information. The topic that we review those audits, we'll be able to detail what we find in those contracts, right? But the one question that has come up here on our end, speaking of contractors are perhaps skirting the requirements of the consumer protection decision. So what we run into, and I think the commission and the CSLB all anticipated that maybe contractors would do this. As we know, the decision stated that self-install applications weren't required to submit these packages and contracts, and now we have contractors that are submitting applications as self-install. So the question is, how do we handle that situation?
Okay, so just, you're a little bit hard to hear. So you're saying that they are claiming self-financed when they are submitting their
Claiming self-install.
self-install?
Self-install, yeah.
Is that just like a checkbox that then once they check it, then they don't have to submit other documents? Is that how would they
Correct.
allowed to be interconnected after? Like, okay.
Correct. So our portal basically says, it has logic in it that says, okay, if this is a self-install and the customer is submitting this application themselves, right, then the portal will not require them to submit the consumer protection guide nor the contract. But if it's anything other, if it's a contractor, then those documents are required.
It's a little bit difficult to hear, but this sounds like an owner-builder issue. Could I be wrong? If somebody wants to elaborate.
No, it sounds like a loophole issue with me that people find a way to work around systems whenever you add requirements. That's what it sounds like.
Correct.
But we'll have to figure out how to.
Well, it sounds like a really good issue to raise that we'll have to discuss some potential joint audits and inspections on some of these, especially if you're seeing a trend in the increase reporting of self-installed. I'd like to go back to the first question, though, just to confirm for SCEs at least, that you are uploading the contracts now as of October.
Yes, so the contracts are in our portal.
Okay.
Those are already required.
Okay, so we'll go back and check with Becky those last rounds and maybe have to do some, but I don't know if PG&E or STG&E wanted to confirm as well. Okay, well, we'll put that as a follow-up. Marta, did you want to go to the mic or?
I think Ed Murray had something too.
Oh, sorry, Ed.
Thanks. Thank you. I had a couple of points. That there's probably less than 1% are self-installs, just so you know. So that's impossible that they're doing that. That is a loophole. And then as far as the CSLB and HIS goes, we have notifications they send out in letter forms to the contractor. I know I've received them. And it's Rick's pretty good about telling us about what we need to do. So that shouldn't be a problem as far as you're concerned. And so then, as far as the 7-day rescission, if you're going to do it for the solar guys, why don't you do it for everybody? I mean, across the board. And lastly, the bond. I know a $15,000 bond costs me $65 a year. When somebody needs to tap a bond, it's usually catastrophic, and there's multiple hits on that bond. So I would recommend an increase in bond. I think the $15,000 is nothing in these days.
Thank you, Ed.
So I just had a clarification point about the contracts received. So contracts that were executed before the consumer protection guidelines went forward in September would not have the required disclosures. But if the contract was executed after the October date, then we definitely want to make sure that those disclosures are on there. So we're looking forward from October. Oh, sorry.
Hold on. Be patient with me, everybody. Hi, Alicia Bohigian with Grid Alternatives. I'm just curious if you have thought of requiring some kind of professional growth for a course on ethics or things like that prior to renewal of a salesperson license.
Yeah, well, it's something that our board has wrestled with over the years is whether we should have continuing education. Right now, what we're looking at though is through, we have a program, it's called a letter of admonishment, where we can, as an example, require someone to take a course if they're not complying with the law. We use it for building permits as an example. So we can certainly look at that. Right now, we don't have a continuing education requirement, but I think what Ed brought up is that we do have the ability to educate our licensees and our registrants to the requirements. And if they are violating, it's somewhat technical, let's develop a training course for them. If they have to watch on a video and maybe take an exam at the end. So we'll definitely look at that.
Okay, I think we need to move on to stay on time. We will have plenty of time for more comments and questions and discussion. So could we get the PUC PowerPoint uploaded?
Well, while we're doing that, I just want to reiterate the appreciation. I know when we first started, this particular contractor, I just can't overstate how much confirmation that is that this collaboration is working, and in particular for some of the residents that we met in the valley that were also impacted by him, where he literally fled. So I hope we can continue to see that case all the way through, so that there is a model out there that this collaboration is working and that people are being heard. Thank you for your work on that.
Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Chris Wessling, who is our Energy Division lead analyst and filling in for Carrie Fleischer as she's out on leave for a few months. And very ably taking over all of this.
Hi, everybody. So it's a little redundant now, but we're going to go through quick updates on the Consumer Protection Guide, an update on AB 1070, which is a legislative mandate to standardize the bill savings estimate that solar providers give customers, and then going to go through some future plans for proposal for a citation program and an upcoming ruling on a solar restitution fund. So as I think most of you know, the CPUC passed decision 1809-044, the NEM, the Net Energy Metering Consumer Protection Decision, that created the Solar Consumer Protection Guide. English version, Korean, Spanish, Tagalog, Vietnamese, and audio versions were released that July and September. And the interconnection portals were updated and took effect starting September 30th. When it took effect, the decision mandated that the consumer had to sign the guide with a wet signature or handwritten signature. A letter from the Energy Division Director extended the allowance of both electronic and wet signatures until the issue was resolved by the CPUC. In February, on February 6th, CPUC proposed or passed decision 2002-011, which well, first of all, allows the status quo to continue on until June 2020, 120 days from when it was issued. And then after that date, it allows for electronic signatures, but with some conditions. So the main ones are for door-to-door sales, paper copy of the guide must be presented unless the customer requests an electronic copy. The wet signature must be offered as the default unless the consumer requests an electronic signature. And when the customer signs it electronically, an audit trail is uploaded into the interconnection portal. Then on AB 1070, it was passed in 2017, directs the CPUC to develop standardized inputs and assumptions to be used in the calculation and presentation of electric utility bill savings to the consumer. It can be expected after installing a solar system. This past summer, the CPUC had a workshop, released a staff proposal for implementation, had a workshop, received comments, reply comments on that proposal, and the next step is a proposed decision for the CPUC to implement this. And then some things are coming up. On September 30th, 2020, there will be the second annual release of the Solar Consumer Protection Guide, or it'll take effect. We're going to solicit stakeholder input on changes to the guide in March. That'll go out to the CPUC NEM service list. And then, Sarah?
Sure. So the decision that was just approved in this month, or last meeting in the previous meeting of this month, did allow for a citation program to be proposed by our Consumer Protection and Enforcement Division. That will, I don't know if Marta wants to comment more on that, but there will be a chance for folks to comment on that, and that would be to cite the utilities, the investor-owned utilities, if they are not complying with the requirements of our decisions, just to clarify. And then the other thing that we mentioned, and I believe is mentioned in the decision, was that the last kind of big piece of this issue that we have left unresolved and are working to resolve and hope to discuss here today is a restitution fund for victims of fraud and those who remain unresolved. So we are still in the process of deciding which cases would be eligible and where would that funding come from. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Well, I think we're kind of all aiming at the same thing. I know, Dave, in your kind of ending points on the need for the bond to be increased as another way at this problem, and really looking to have a dialogue around this. We've heard just a few suggestions on where the revenue could come from. Want to make sure it's both sufficient but not something that is sitting there. And we want to make sure we have a process that really builds off of this task force and the coordination that's increasing. And so we do have some thoughts about how we envision that, but really want to hear from all of you on what that scope and need is and what process we could use to actually have a determination on it, but really something that that is both efficient and not too cumbersome. So not any specifics on that, but really something that we continue to see a need for, unfortunately.